Hi, folks. This is John Watson, International Master John Watson. This is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show, let me go through the sort of housekeeping intro, just so you know how to contact the show and what it's about. The main idea of this show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world in general. If you want to ask questions in advance, we have the Twitter channel, which is hashtag AskIamWatson, AskImWatson. You can do that anytime during the week. You can send a tweet to that hashtag AskIamWatson with a question for the show. Questions that don't get answered in one week, I will try to get to in the next week or the next. So far, the Twitter channel hasn't gotten a lot of tweets, but we got some good questions. A number of ICC members have sent messages to my ICC handle, John L. Watson. That's John-L as in lion, Watson, which is another way to reach me. An alternative is to ask questions right now in the chat channel, and I'm looking at that right now. I see a hello, and I see that my picture's sort of cut off, but I don't know what to do about that this time. And if you aren't already registered, you can actually start typing in the chat channel and they'll ask you to register. It's very quick and easy. And after that, you can log on and use the live chat. You don't need to be an ICC member to watch this show and contribute to this chat channel or to send a question via Twitter. So this is not limited to ICC members at all. So what kinds of questions might you want to ask? Anything really, but a few areas that I have expertise in are openings, since I've taught, played, and written about almost all of them over the years, chess strategy, leading players, and chess books and videos, which people are interested in. So, over the years during my other shows, I tend to get questions about openings through my handle, in other words, messaging John L. Watson anyway, so you can ask those same kind of questions and I can give a more complete answer, or ask anything that comes to mind, obviously. Okay, let's start with this week's questions. I got quite a few of them, as I say. I'll go back and forth between those and the ones in the chat box. So let's just begin here. I'm going to start with a question that I was asked. Actually, first, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. Oh, let me minimize this. A tiny bit of housekeeping. Last week, I was asked about this. This won't take long. What to do in a situation like this. And I mentioned this answer, which is fashionable and quite good, I think, here. And what I wanted to point out, which I didn't point out last week, is please avoid this trap. Attacking that bishop, very, very tempting. For example, if the bishop went here, you could play here. But unfortunately, there's this move, check, and the knight drops. For some reason, this is hard to find, or to see, because very strong players, grandmasters, have fallen for this trick. And you should definitely know about it. I think that's because it's in the opening and you're just not suspecting anything yet, whereas if it was later in the game, you'd be looking at all these checks and captures and more carefully. But it's amazing how many times people have fallen for that trick. Okay, my first question, Ken Case asks, I was wondering what you think of 1e4 c5, 2 knight f3 d6, d4, E takes d4. Let's look at this. There's two Sicilian questions to begin with. That's kind of fun. Queen takes d4. So what do you think Black's best response is? Okay, so I think queen takes d4 is really interesting. I've taught it before, and it teaches a lot of ideas, and it provides really excellent general chess practice and experience. And of course, the main advantage is that it avoids mainline theory, all the Najdorfs and dragons and things like that. It's fun for attacking players because you get your pieces out very quickly. And I'd probably recommend a6 for black. And the idea there is that if black plays knight c6, white can pin that and gain some time is the idea. Just keep getting his pieces out quickly. We'll see that. There's nothing wrong with this line. Top GMs use this all the time as black, but I think a6 is a lot easier to play. Now, the recent World Cup game with Svidler Karyakin just happened with a6, so I'll show you that, how that started. But let's look at a main line first from a game played a few days ago where White really should have beaten someone rated 450 points above him, and I think that's typical of this line. It's very tricky. It may not be the greatest line objectively. So let me put that game up. That's 359. Okay, this is a game, as I say, between a 2110 player and a 2567 player. And you'll see that if you could get this game against 2567 players, you would be very thrilled and would probably win it. I think White just got nervous or something. So here we go. Queen takes d4. What's the idea? Well, develop quickly, get the queen out, and hopefully not lose too much time with the queen. So in this case, Black attacked it directly. White pins the knight. He's trying to develop as quickly as possible, never lose any time in the system. That's the idea. Now the problems with this line, by the way, are just structural. First of all, in this case, Black has two bishops, and that's huge on a high level. The other problem is, of course, Black has his usual central majority. So now sometimes White plays c4 here, just to control the center, but of course that uses a time. It uses an extra pawn move. And every move, Black gets to get those bishops in quicker. So the more thematic move, certainly the more fun move, is to play what he plays in this game, getting another piece out. It's quite funny. This is sort of like a Misha Tal kind of opening, where White just gets his piece out real quick. Now he's going to castle queenside, and he's going to play the other rook over. He's going to have all his pieces out way before Black has his pieces out. But he won't have a pawn break, so it's not that great. Obviously, you know, since top GMs don't play this that much, although they've certainly played it, and as I say, Karyakin just played it against Svidler. I mean, actually, Svidler played against Karyakin, I think. Anyway, nevertheless, you can see that Black players don't play it that much because of these positional reasons. Okay, so White plays here and has all his pieces out. Black plays here, and look at that. It's just centralizing. Beautiful centralization. All these pieces are aimed at the center. This is the only one that isn't aimed at the center, but it has options of playing bishop takes knight sometimes and maybe winning that d pawn. Although generally Black can either take back with the bishop and then double these pawns and have plenty for a pawn, or even take back with the pawn. So you wouldn't take that yet. Okay, now Black can play queen c7. Actually, castles first. That move you'll see the point of. I mean, it's a standard Sicilian move, and it defends this pawn on the queen side, which goes with Black's next move. Now that pawn's already defended. Queen c7 is a common move. There's other moves, but queen a5 is played a lot. And this line goes way, way back. Now, just technically speaking, for years this was the only move. It's in most of the books and the videos and everything else about this opening. One idea is this trick that you play knight d5 and attacking the queen, and if the queen takes, then you win a piece with knight takes bishop check, and then rook takes back. So after knight d5, Black would have to retreat. Let me just show you that. Let's say Black makes a random move. Then we have this move, attacking the queen. The queen should come back to defend that bishop, but then White can win the d-pawn by taking the bishop and taking the d-pawn. But the obvious move is here, but this shows why king b1 was good. That move is not with check. This is a little trick worth knowing. And then take back, and White's a piece up. May not be that simple, but basically White's much, much better. Okay, so that's the threat, and Black plays, excuse me, he doesn't play a6, he plays this move, getting out of that trick. And other moves are queen c7 and queen b6. Queen b6 is pretty common, but obviously we don't have time to show you everything. Black's fine in these positions, by the way. It's just that White has decent attacking chances anyway, even though Black theoretically is fine. Really good players as Black don't mind playing this position at all. Okay, now White plays the standard reorganization here, which is this move, which seems a little funny because he could have gotten there real early, right? And but Black's been committed to playing a bunch of different moves that are unusual in the Sicilian, so White's still ahead in development. Now, one of the ideas is to play here and here, and then move the bishop back sometimes, especially if the queen's here, by the way, and then keep attacking. Just launch your pawns. Basically, you need pawns for this attack to break through. You need some sort of pawn attack. Okay, so in this game, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on theory. Black plays a very natural move, protecting the d pawn, thinking about d5 sometimes, and white plays there. The other plan, as I say, is f3 and g4. Okay, so black plays there, and this is the move here. Vasyukov, the old Soviet GM, played this system as white. He's the first one maybe that really made a living off of this. You can imagine that if black takes this and white takes this, that this file over here is going to be incredibly strong, and he won games with that, although very few people dared to take that. And so black just develops, and that's just a natural move. And now white plays this move, just continuing the attack. One idea now is to take this and then play g5. And then those pawns are coming in really fast, and you're opening up a lot of lines on the king side. You can see what fun this is. Black takes. I think usually black would probably decline that. It's such a tremendous position for white. And yet this guy's Sandopan, a well-known player, 2567. And look what happens. This is really great what happens here. You know, this person who's not even a master, at least not 2200 anyway. And he retreats. There really isn't anything much better than that. And it turns out already white's pretty much winning this game. One way of playing here is queen here directly threatening mate. And that's probably a simpler way to win this position, because black's going to have to play here, and then white can play here. And this f6 move is killing, because he can't take it either way. So that's going to be a tremendous move. And there's also pressure on this square. This is basically winning. Isn't that amazing already in this game? He doesn't play that. Wait, did I go back 2 moves? Yeah, he plays this first, which is still probably winning, but it's a little more difficult. Black gets out of the way of those pins. Makes a lot of sense. White captures, black recaptures, just normal moves, and white attacks that way because this pawn is pinned, because the rook's hanging. You can imagine now f6 is going to follow after the knight moves. I'm not going to show you a lot of variations. Now f6 comes immediately. It turns out that's not the best. You should attack the knight first, and black can almost resign. He's forced to play here. Then you're simply smashing through on this side of the board. This is a great move here. Threatening this, of course, but also threatening all kinds of checkmating ideas. Also, rook takes g6 is already a thought, because, well, it's a winning move if black plays slowly. And I'll just, well, let's just show that. Here, you can just play rook here, threatening the knight, which will follow by mate. And then we play check. And then we play queen here. Now we're threatening queen, g6 check with a mate and or this idea. So with a quick mate, I shouldn't have said it's an immediate mate, but it wins. So that's a forced win. Isn't this wonderful? It's a great little system. And you can imagine playing a lower player that if you can get these kinds of lines, you're just going to win even more easily. He doesn't find that move. he plays, it's really sad, really. I'm sure after the game he was kicking himself. But f6 is a good move too. It's just not as good at all. Black should probably just retreat the bishop, the rook here. He makes another mistake. Takes, and now queen e2 wins almost more easily. My computer says +6. And instead he takes back, white takes, check, back. Still winning at this point is this move, hitting the h-pawn. And then if this move, now this time it's hard to find though, that's really the winning move, threatening knight takes f6. And it turns out that, for example, after this you can just play here and there's no stopping mate along the file. So, and then there's other variations, but you can imagine. Doesn't find that. Plays here, and I don't think I'm going to show you the tragic end. All of a sudden, black can defend everything. There's no more wins, and that means black has what, a pawn or two and a positional advantage. And very soon he was winning. Just a couple more moves. There. Everything's just solid, and it just turns out that's winning. Now he just plays for d5. That covers this square, by the way. And the big setter is going to win this. Black's solid enough on the king side. Very sad conclusion, because it could have upset a tremendously higher rated player. But you can see the ideas. Okay, now in this fiddler game, let me go back to just a neutral board here. Okay, in this fiddler game, this move was played. Sorry, here we go. these moves. Now remember, we're looking at queen takes d4. This move was played. I'd recommend that because it's simpler. It's easier. It stops bishop b5, and therefore the idea of knight c6 comes in. And even the idea of e5, and there's no bishop b5 check, which is often a good answer to e5. This game went, let me see, c4. Try to dominate the center. That's really the obvious move. Benko used to play this move twice. He won games with this move, but I think it's pretty unconvincing. And he just, because Benko was a great endgame player. He writes an endgame column for Chess Life. But this kind of thing is actually pretty easy. Just here, play it like a dragon. Later on, you can play knight here with tempo, get rid of that bishop. So I don't really believe that line. But, oh, sorry, I was thinking I could revert to a real game, but there's no game up there. Okay, so queen takes d4, our fun move. But now he has to switch to positional chess, which of course is not as dangerous for black. Black's not going to get checkmated in a line like this. And that happened. And white played a kind of slow move. I think he could just develop instead, but he wants to stop knight g4 in some positions. It's a little slow, and black just played normally. Karyakin just played these moves. But white got again, a fine game. I mean, it's just an equal game. Black played knight here. These are not forced moves for either side, obviously, but they're good to look at because these are high 2,700 players who, by the way, were playing in the World Cup in the finals. So they both qualified for the candidates that are coming up. Okay, white played rook d1, takes, and then black makes a really interesting move. This could be just a space advantage for white, but black just opens up the position. And notice that after taking, he has this move, attacking the rook. Now this structure is not always that great. There are two center pawns to none, but sometimes there's holes. It just turns out in this case, because black's so active, and that knight's well placed too, that he's just fine here. This is about equal. Okay, so that's really the answer to that. A6 is my sort of answer. Now, I think I'll go back to the chat questions. And let's see what we've got here. What Ruy Lopez defense would you recommend at the moment? Uh-oh. I'm not a Ruy Lopez expert. When I'm white, when my students are white, I recommend I recommend actually, well, if they play a Berlin defense kind of thing, just play the E3 systems and then here. And they're pretty fascinating. White keeps getting advantages even in a top level play, but it's kind of sad to have to play that. A Ruy Lopez defense, I would say go into the main lines. There's nothing to fear from this. I think there's actually a very interesting line here, which is to play I enjoy this line, is to play here with the idea of here and castling queenside. You can find that in a couple of my books, but it's still doing perfectly well. It's a little bit irregular, so that's kind of fun to play something slightly irregular. And then if they go back, well, I have students that play this line, here, here, and then here, here, here. This classical line, it's doing very well. Currently, it's complicated. It's kind of active. If you want to play something a little more solid, you can play for the standard D6 ideas, like, for example, this kind of thing. And this famous kind of line. And now you can play this move. This move is still played sometimes with the bishop here. That was played recently, again in the World Cup. There's the famous old Chigorin line here. Anyway, something solid, I would say. The Breyer is extremely popular right now, and that's when you go back with your knight and you come back here. Strange to say, but it frees a black's pawn to cover d5, and black's bishop has an open line now, as opposed to being blocked by the knight. So the Zaitsev is fun too. There's plenty of things to play, and I'm afraid you have to just relate to theory there. As I say, the one I used to recommend was the classical line, because it gets pieces out real quickly, and the classical line is this bishop c5 idea. Okay, let's try something else. Build a wall. That's the Berlin Wall. Someone wants to play knight f6. You can do that if you want to get into endings. That's this, by the way. We looked at this last week, I think, mentioned it at least, which is just going here. It's kind of ruined the Ruy Lopez for white in a lot of ways because black can draw, but that's a very, very top professional line, and I actually wouldn't recommend it except to strong players who really want to draw as black. Queen d3 instead of castling queenside. Yes, you can play it early. You can even play it on move 6. He's talking about the earlier queen d4 variation. I don't think I don't think I'll actually put that up because we just went over Queen D4 at quite a bit of more detail than is normal for this thing. Have you ever seen a blunderfest to match the 10 games between Svidler and Karyakin over the last 5 days? 10 decisive games out of 10, most due to hideous blunders. Yeah, it was quite amazing. I mean, there's obviously, these players have been so good for so long. They're top in the world. You don't get those ratings without being magnificent players. So clearly something else happened. I think a couple things. One thing is they both already qualified for the candidates, and that was just such a relief. And there had been so much pressure on them in the rounds before that, trying to win the World Cup and therefore qualify for the candidates, which is the tournament for the World Championship. And they both said that was their goal. And this was just kind of gravy, the possibility of winning the World Cup. So their incentive was down. And then the other thing that everyone mentioned, of course, is they were simply exhausted from the World Cup, where you play every day. You play all these matches where everything depends on one game because they're very short matches. And in Karyakin's case, all those matches, it seems like he was behind in a whole bunch of them and had to come back to win just to stay in the match. And I think that's a pretty good explanation. Nevertheless, it's just amazing that players of that strength could really just make such horrendous mistakes that most of us wouldn't ever make in blitz games, or at least a lot of us wouldn't. But what can you say? This is Peter Svidler. How many times has he won the U.S. Sahara Championship, or the Soviet, not the Soviet, the Russian Championship? Maybe 6 or something. It's just ridiculous. And Sergei Karyakin, who became a grandmaster at 14 and has been one of the top players in the world for forever. So yeah, it's a great question. So let me see, where are we now? Let me go back, since we don't have an immediate question. I've got some great questions this week, either on Twitter or this was on Twitter. F. Ford Allen asks, in the Sicilian English attack, we're doing a couple Sicilians here, white pawns E4, F3, G4 seems structurally weak, possibly. Can black exploit? Question mark. So anyway, I just saw this question this morning. I was doing a lot of other things, so I may not have the greatest answer of all time, but it got me to thinking. So let's look at a typical position that he's talking about. The English attack is F3 and G4, basically. So this is your typical start. Let's look at it with a Najdorf. It's most famous against the Najdorf. I'll show you one against the Taimanov. You can also play it against the Scheveningen. So this is what he's talking about, is this F3 move. And the order is, so let's make this move first, even though that allows Knight G4. Which I think someone asked about last week. Let me just see if I'm going to show a game with that first. I don't think I will. Oh, there is one game I'd like to show, or one lengthy opening thing. Mostly I'm just going to talk in general. Now, the main question here, okay, F3 and G4 is the idea. And let's just maybe play a move. Let's play the Najdorf version here. And the question is, on this F4 and G, let's play here or something, that on these moves with G4, I'll just make another move here. Can you exploit these weaknesses? Now, what are the weaknesses? Here's one, and here's another. And arguably, these squares are a little weak right now, maybe even the H-pawn, if somehow you could get a rook on that side of the board. Now, it turns out that very seldom you can't get your pieces onto those squares or attacking those squares. So what black usually does is he attacks on the queen side while white is attacking on the king side. So you'll see a million games with this kind of idea. In other words, black ignores the king side and simply defends when he's attacked there. So that's the simple answer, really large majority of cases. And one way of showing that, by the way, is that after F3, black extremely often plays this move. That's a very popular move. It was just played by one of the very top players of the world, I think in the World Cup again. And it used to be played by many, many top players when the Najdorf was being played even more. It just stops G4, and that shows you how he doesn't really think he can exploit the weaknesses after this because he's trying to stop the move in the first place. It's a preventative move, and it looks very odd. It's weakening itself, but the idea is if you can slow down white's attack on the king side, you can start attacking on the queen side and use this file and attack because usually white's going to castle queenside in most of these positions and try to attack. So that's the superficial answer. Now I thought though of a couple examples, exceptions to this that I thought were very interesting. Let me just get these in order. Okay, here's one. Even in this exact position, let's say that black does play here and allows g4, or let's say queen d2 first. Or is g4 already in? I'm not sure. I may get the order wrong here. Castles. I think g4 is already in. No, not really. Not in this line. Now white plays g4. It doesn't really. The move orders do matter, but not tremendously much. Usually, it's good to get the g4 in early so that these knights can't get coordinated, because otherwise, sometimes this knight can go back, and it's nice to get it in early. I think that's been the consensus of opinion. So now black plays this move, starting his attack, and white plays here. Now notice a little trick here. This is a very desirable move for white, just stopping knight b6, covering a lot of squares. But there's a nice little trick here. I'll give you 1 second to find that trick. It's this move. And the idea is that if you take that, if you don't take it, sure, you get the g-file, but the bishop can defend very well from that square. And then you take here, and you might think, well, it's only 2 pawns for a piece, but whoops, guess what happens, this fella. So that's why queen f2 is bad. Might as well show you a few tricks. It's nice because I've played a lot of these Sicilians, so I know, and taught them, so I know a lot of these little silly things. So instead of that, he plays g5. And here's an example of an exception where you can play this move. It's not the only move. It's not the only move played, but you can play that move. And I think, and that blocks off these, and it hits that weakness. We were talking about that weakness. And what's more interesting is what happens next. White plays here. That's considered the best move. White takes with the pawn, considered the best move. And now black plays here. So here he is playing on the king side, and specifically, now this is a nice pawn structure, so he's going to take that and open a g-file. But specifically, black all of a sudden has a file coming down on this square and this square. This is a nice outpost square suddenly. And this pawn suddenly does look a little more vulnerable. These squares are more easily occupied. So black's playing on the king side. So there's an example of trying to exploit the weaknesses of g4. Kind of a nice one. It's a sideline. But I'm trying to think of, there are a couple other ideas. Now let me see about this main line. Do I have that game? Maybe I can put up a game. But okay, I didn't actually put that game up, so I'll have to show it to you. Let me show you the Taimanov game. I think that one's pretty interesting. One of the main lines of Taimanov now goes like this. Let me just show you this. So probably almost every variation of the Sicilian, you can try to do something on the king side, but it's sure not easy. This is called the Taimanov Sicilian. And if white plays an English attack, that's bishop here followed by that, That's kind of the idea. And black plays normally. He can play this move first if he wants to avoid certain lines. And then after f3. Okay, now a nice move here, a very popular move, is to play this bishop b4 idea. But instead we're going to play bishop e7. And let me make sure about that move order. I want to see this to be real sure about what's going on. Yeah, bishop e7 here, g4. I guess he's already castled, so we'll go g4. I will go castles first. Bishop e7, castles. You can imagine these are sort of typical Sicilian moves. b5, g4. Here we go. So he's going to attack on the king side. Here's a funny way of meeting this. Taking here, you can take next move too, but there's some technical differences. Then developing, and now after this you can go this way again. One of those few lines where you can play knight h5. And look at that. That already covers a big weakness. What could be an outpost. But of course it decentralizes, and white also has a trick here, this move. And the idea is to cover this square and of course attack the queen, and if the queen takes, which is the best move actually, and you'll see why in a second, then we get this position, and a good move for black here now is to come back. He's going to be a pawn down, but you'll see because of the weaknesses on the king side, he's quite happy. And let me show you that. That's here. And now Robert Van Kampen, who has a video on this system, recommends this move here, h6, which is very clever. Oh, by the way, you could take this, and it just turns out there are some tactical problems with this. White ends up getting this move in, and all of a sudden, even though you're even material, your king's a little bit exposed. The it's hard to get this rook out, but this does get the rook out. So remember we talked about this weakness and this weakness sometimes if the h-pawn is moved. I should have mentioned that. And now we're talking about this weakness here. And it turns out this is plenty. And black can sneak his king over here somewhere now. Or anyway, the rook is out. That's the main point. And it just turns out this is more than enough for a pawn. I mean, I would try and win as black here. There's even a threat here, knight g3, by the way, or an idea. You have to look at this yourself to understand why this is so good for black. I mean, I'm sure it's equal if white plays well, but black has really nice chances here. And it's a good example of how we exploited that g4 move, because now we have that weakness, the h-pawn weakness. We have all these pieces that we're attacking, and dark squares in general, e5 and f4. So I think it's a cute line. And I think that explains that a little bit. Let's see what we've got on the chat channel. Someone likes, oh, look at this. We have a lot. Now, how good am I at scrolling up here? Not very good. Let me try my mouse. Karyakin at age 12 was a grandmaster. Very good. Good correction. Who fan? Love all the circles and arrows. Can I ask, does anyone there chess on their iPhone? Oh, does anybody play chess on their iPhone or iPad? I'm sure they do. I don't, but I think people do on both. I use chess programs on my iPad. A lot of people play on their phones just because it's fun. I don't know about an iPad. I know if they play on phones. They do play on their iPad. I know someone who does that. It's hard because the stylus is so inaccurate unless you have a big tablet. I guess the new iPhone is bigger. I love using my Note 4. That's an answer to that question. The Samsung Galaxy Note with a pen is another thing. It's more accurate. I'm glad you're all answering this because I can't answer it. I'm not an expert on smartphones. I finally have one. I'm finding it's hindering me when I play on the PC. I guess I'd understand that. If you play on the PC, you can play on the phone or the PC. Oh, you're so used to the phone. It's too big on the PC and I miss a lot. Okay. You can always shrink the size of the board on the PC, I guess. It seems like they went backwards from the palm to these giant styluses. No comment, because I'm not an expert. I need to get back into playing on the PC. I want to start recording for YouTube. Oh, that would be fun. What would you play for black against 3e4 in the QGA? Well, I used to play both sides of this. He's talking about this, the Queen's Gambit accepted. That's where you just take the pawn. And he's talking about the line e4, which for a while was enormously popular. I used to play the move knight c6 here, which is very much like a Chigorin defense. And it attacks this, so it sort of limits what white can do. And then after this, you can play here. And then you have this idea of playing e5 and breaking up the center, maybe even bishop e4 check. e5 is a big theme. For example, moves like this, you can pin. And then you still have pressure on the center, and you have e5 as an idea. And I always liked this system. That's why white got clever and started playing that move. Anand used to play the black side of this and do very well, but it's a complicated thing, and I haven't really kept up with the theory. Knight f6 is a similar idea, except this time we run into these. And I always like these positions for white. I just enjoy these. It looks like a big outpost on d5. Well, it is a big outpost, but as in so many positions, just one outpost when you're low on space somehow tends to favor the other side if the other side has space and activity. So I'm not thrilled with this position. I used to teach and play it as white. Now I play more conservatively against the Queen's Gambit accepted. So I probably wouldn't play knight f6 unless I'd really studied it. One of the ideas here is to play the knight back to b6 and a knight here and get pressure here, and hopefully the bishop comes to f5. Pawn here would be the plan. But maybe you should look into knight c6 and see how it's doing. Now there's always a traditional e5 move, and that goes, excuse me, an immediate e5 there. The point being, if he takes, you're fine because you take the queens off and the king is badly placed. Remember, just taking the queens off is not an endgame because white would have all of his pieces left and so would black, all of his other pieces. That means you're really in a middle game. It's called a queenless middle game, but in this case it's particularly a middle game because so many pieces are left. And so white often just plays this move. And then there's some funny lines, for example, if black takes this, white can play here with attacking chances. But this has all been worked out in tremendous detail, and I think Anand played this one too. I think black's okay here. He also has this bishop b4 check idea. But I think white would have fun here too. I remember I used to have fun as white here. Um, I'd look into this and see if it's still good. Oh, another move is this, which used to be thought to be not all that great because white gets this this big attack going, at least supposedly, in these lines, and or a potential attack, and but that's no longer considered that dangerous. Black has ways of playing that. He also has these funny early b5 moves. I don't think the e4 move is that dangerous anymore, but it's certainly still played, and it's fun for white. I tend to play these e3 lines like this and take, and I have some specialty lines that I give in my, a little irregular lines that I give in my book. So I hope that answers something. Let me see. Do you still think, excuse me, do you still think this line in the French is okay? Great question. This is a line that everybody says is bad, and yet every line that they've said is bad, I think is okay for black. So, because I've looked at the exact things they look at and then found improvements. It's this crazy little move. One of the ideas of this move is that what is white threatening anyway in this position? What is white doing with all his pieces? And one point about this is bishop d3 is often well answered with c5. And knight f3 is often well answered with, knight f3 is often well answered with knight f6, because after e5 and knight d7, this knight isn't particularly well placed. So in a way you can make waiting moves, and that's why people play this move a6, excuse me, coughing here. But you can also play this some crazy slow moves. There are a lot of slow moves here you can play. The one I really like is this, and one idea supports this move g5. I know that seems kind of silly. The other idea is that a lot of times there's a bishop g5 later in these positions, and you've just stopped that. Another idea is there's knight g5 ideas, so that when you take this, you've stopped the move knight g5 if you play d takes e in some lines. But the main idea is, well, what's white going to play here? Usually he's going to play this move. And well, and for example, well, okay, I'll just say that. Otherwise, there'll be too much detail here. And that means that black can play his normal knight f6 move, and white can advance, and black can go here. Now, black's a tempo down on one of these lines with knight here, but you've eliminated the traditional Tarrasch line, which goes, excuse me, like this, here, here, and the knight will go to e2, which is very flexible because with a knight on e2, you have a place for this knight. That's a big problem in the Tarrasch. Where is that knight going? Well, now it can go here, and both knights are well placed. Also, you have f4 ideas in some lines too. So black has, by playing h6, he's discouraged that line. Well, in fact, white can't even really get to that line, because if he plays bishop here first, there's this. And if he plays c3, well, I don't want to go into too much detail because we've got to get to other questions. But c3 is no problem, really. So so anyway, this happens, this line with, excuse me, with, after this, if white plays here, we get the same kind of position, but white's already committed to the knight on f3. It's called the universal system. And that knight doesn't have an easy square to go to now, and the f-pawn is blocked. So, for example, if you copied the exact same line, you'd have this kind of thing. And here's what's interesting about this position. Is h6 ever going to be useful? We're in a standard position now. And why on earth white's a tempo ahead of what's called the universal system? The issue, though, is that when white makes, you know, sort of natural moves like this or something, oh, excuse me, it's black's move here. You can already, in this position, you can either play a little bit slowly or you can already play this move g5, which is now a standard setup against the universal system, is to play g5. And often the g5 pawn isn't protected, or it's protected by a bishop here. That's actually an exact position. If you move this pawn back and the bishop is here, that's a standard line too. One advantage to having h6 in is there's fewer tactics that involve sacrificing on g5 or piling up on g5. Another advantage is this bishop can now go this way. It's very flexible. And in my opinion, this line is holding up just fine. Now, there are many other tries against h6. You can look at Lawrence Trent's video, for example, but I think you'll find that actually, oddly enough, this move holds up. There are many other ways for white to play, obviously. You can play slowly, e takes d5 ideas, But notice that in this position, this is still useful because that stops bishop g5 in a lot of lines. It means that you can put your knight here instead of here and be very, very happy. That's all I'm going to say. It just goes on and on, the details here, but h6 turns out to be useful in every line. Okay, good question. Now let me see. Who do you think will dethrone Carlsen? We talked about this last week in some detail, and there's a book by Anish Giri about, and it's called "Who Will Dethrone Carlsen" or something of that sort. And we talked about it at great length. He lists 10 players that could, and he doesn't even list himself. He's 21 years old and rated one of the highest players in the world, so he's certainly a good option. What's the best reply for white to the King's Indian defense? That's awfully general. I think we'll at least skip that for a while, maybe address it next week. Is that covers in dangerous weapons the French? Yes, and then you'd have to update that since that's rather an old book. Yes, the h6 line is covered in Dangerous Weapons the French. That's a book I wrote some time ago. By the way, I should say about Dangerous Weapons the French that it's probably the sloppiest book I've ever written, because what I was told originally was that these lines were just supposed to be fun and crazy, and you weren't supposed to pay too much attention to massive details. And then later on, of course, these other writers in the Dangerous Weapons series wrote these very detailed, complicated, very accurate books. And what I found in Dangerous Weapons, looking back on it, is most of my suggestions for white aren't very good. They're a little bit unsound. They're fun, but maybe not all that great. Hey, look at that. Not too bad considering all the various programs that have to be reset. So I managed to start my computer again. I don't know how the power possibly went out. We'll see if that, well, we'll hope that doesn't continue. I don't know why. It just never happens. In all of my lessons and all of these other things, that's actually never happened, believe it or not. All right, let me minimize this and talk about, okay, and get that board back up. Sorry about that. And there we go. You should see the board now, hopefully, with any luck. That should be coming. There's a delay. Okay, here we go. Okay, very sorry. My apologies. I don't have any idea why that happened. It's not ICC's fault. It's my local computer. One of the two. Luckily, the other one was up. All right. Where were we? Chats. Can you all hear me now? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The book is actually called After Magnus. We talked about it last time, and well, we can see what other questions have come up in the meantime, or I can switch back to questions that I was sent during the week. Well, I got a lot of those. Make sure the CPU fan is still spinning. Yeah, I have this special coolant system. I have no idea why this went off. It's actually the first time. It's almost a new computer. Yeah, the fan, it's true. I've had problem with the fans, but I don't believe it. Maybe though, maybe this, see if it feels hot. Anyway, okay, other questions from before, or should I move on to ones that have already been sent? Is the twin primes conjecture true? No comment. 1 second, guys, I'm talking. Give me a second. We'll go way up. Who was the weakest and strongest world champion? Well, if you don't count the old world champions from before the first official world champion, who was Steinitz, then Oive is generally considered the weakest. He was awfully strong at his peak. People forget that. His world championship was attributed to Alyekin being drunk at the board and that sort of thing, but it's very deceptive how good he was. One thing that hurt Oive is that after the war, Oive was a professional. He did many other things with his life, and after the war he had some really bad results, and so people got the idea that he was a weak player, but of course he was older, and more than that, he just wasn't a professional chess player, and he was playing the new Soviet generation, you know, the Smyslovs and the Bronsteins and the Botviniks and all sorts of monstrously good players. So, all right, I don't see, let me just see what else I've missed here. Okay, h6 in the French, we talked about that. Well, let me talk about another question that I got from players. Okay, Niken Widiarato that may stand for something. It says, Dear Mr. Watson, please help answer my question. How do I improve my rapid chess skill? Please help me. Thanks a lot. Whoops. Well, this one's kind of, I'm not a very good person to answer this because I'm not a good rapid player. I don't play very much at all in rapids, and I'm a notoriously ponderous thinker, which is a nice way of saying that I'm a slow thinker. I like to think that's because I think profoundly about positions, but in fact I'm slow, and it's also a terrible habit to be slow and to take positions too seriously. So all I can think of is that you should really play a lot, of course. Just play a lot of rapids. Study a lot of tactics, because most rapids games are decided by some sort of tactical idea, whether it's in the game itself or whether it's in the variations. Play a lot and learn how to move quickly instead of overthinking. I think I've always been an overthinker. So that's about all I have to say. You should ask someone who's much better at rapid chess. Keaton Kira asked me, what do you think the best approach for black is when white plays the knight ge2, knight g3 line? And I have one of these. I have a game with one of these. Let me put that up. That's a very interesting question because it's not that common a line. It used to be. A book was written about it by Furintos and Haag, I think, wrote a book many years ago about the knight g2 system, and some people have recommended it recently. My friend Larry Remlinger has played it a lot over the years. Okay, here's the knight g2 system. Well, this must be a strange. Oh, wrong one. This is Fiddler Karyakin. How did that happen? Let me look at my. I wanted Williams Fiddler. Maybe I'm just not going to get that game, so I'll do it by hand. 7. I'll just do it by hand. All right, so this is the system we're talking about. We're talking about a King's Indian defense. This is the King's Indian defense, for those who don't know. And we're talking about this idea, knight ge2, very flexible move. The idea is you're going to play that move in a lot of positions anyway. You might switch back into a same-ish kind of position with that and that. And most of the time you're going to play knight g3. That makes it an independent line, where you even can think about moves like h4, h5. But the other idea is that the knight on g3 serves as a preventative move in many cases. And it can't be pinned like it can on f3. It's a little trickier than it looks like. It looks slow. And it also neglects d4. There's a weakness. If the knight goes to g3, you're undefending the weakest point in the King's Indian, the point that means the most to a King's Indian player, which is the d4 square. Nevertheless, it's hard to get to that square. Now in this game, let me see, let me see what he did. He castled, a normal move, and here, and now played this interesting move. Give me 1 second here. This interesting move, I'm getting a message, that's why I'm slowing down here. He played this interesting move, h5. Now you can play e5. The main line actually is sort of e5 here. Then you bring the other knight to c5, and white plays for h4. And this line is fine for black. What happens is that he unpins here. Otherwise, there's some dangerous ideas for white, which is to play here, followed by knight takes. And this is quite an attack, as it turns out, because there's no way for black to break the pin. There's no easy way to break the pin. So black breaks the pin first, and then I won't go into any detail here, but he plays knight there, chasing away this bishop. The dark squared bishop in the King's Indian, you very seldom want to give it up as white. It's the most, because this is kind of a bad bishop, isn't it? It's blocked by its own pawns. And so knight a7 drops attacks the bishop, and then a lot of times there's an f5 move, usually knight c5 first. And you can always just develop as black, because white, that's one problem with the white knight on g3. It's not going anywhere. It's a little limited. It's a good preventative move, but it's not a very, very good positive move. So that's the main line. But what we find often, I noticed that there were a lot more wins, a lot of draws in that line, and kind of a split record. There were a lot more wins with this strange move h5, which took me a while to figure out. But a lot of strong players play this first. Now, obviously, there's the idea of h4, but that's a very common idea anyway. First of all, white was going to play h4 in the other line anyway. So why doesn't he play h4? And let me see if I can describe why I think that is. Yeah, I have actually some games with this. The real idea is that c5 seems to be a better move now, either immediately or soon. Yeah, here's an example, which I don't think I can pull up automatically, so I'll read this one too. C5 now. So C5 is a good move anyway. Let me show you. I used to play C5. Let me show you that first. This is a pretty good solution. Just play a Benoni. Just play like that. Notice that he doesn't have anything besides D5 because this knight's no longer covering that square. So you can just pile up on that square. You can play like that. You can take it and then attack whatever is defending it. So really D5 is the only serious move. And taking, of course, is a typical position where I own that square D4, but you don't own D5 because I play E6. I can't always play E6. That favors black in most positions. It's certainly at least equal, which is good when you're black. So instead, we play some sort of Benoni position. And what white tends to do here is he tends to take with this pawn, because this particular Benoni position with knight G3 is not very inspiring. Black's pretty happy to play against that usually, and you'll just have to look that up. So what white tries to do sometimes is play this, play it really safe. And then black has a lot of ways to play this. In this game, he played knight here, bishop here, knight here. Now, I think rook e8 is a good move. Just simple. Take over the file, and then play here with ideas of maybe playing a Benko Gambit like, well, it's not really that much like the Benko Gambit, but you're thinking about b5 in some lines. And white played, let me see. Oh, what would white play here? I don't have this analysis exactly, but I think that white would stop that move. And then black plays here, maybe still thinking about b5. And white would castle, because then if b5 happens, then the rook is protected. So that simply wouldn't work. The queen would be attacked. And now I just give, oh, I'm sorry. In this line, he had h4, h5 in. So basically, these moves were already in, and now he plays knight h7. And that's a perfectly good. You have knight e5 moves. White's pieces aren't really coordinating that well. I think he's equal, but that's all. So in this game, instead of this, he throws h4, h5 in earlier in this position. And now if h4 something happens as like we just saw, so a lot of people don't bother with h4 anymore. They just play here, because if black plays h4 early, then a lot of times white can just come back to this wonderful central square. So what black does is he sort of slows down here. He plays here. The idea is to play either this move or this move. This, by the way, is Simon Williams, who's a strong grandmaster, versus Svidler, who we've talked about and we know. You know, a high 2700 player who just finished second in the World Cup and should have won it. So here, let me just show you how this game went. I mean, it's two top players. It can't hurt. White played here. Black played here. Once again, thinking about maybe there followed by there, a very Benko-like thing. That happens in a lot of these games. And also a6 is a useful move anyway. So white plays here, very aggressive. And now black decides to dump that backwards. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole game because I think e5 here is just very strong. I mean, it hits the center, the queen looks misplaced, the knight looks misplaced. And if you start taking, you start giving black good squares. Now, whether the pawn advances or takes or whatever, black has the c5 square as well. And this is very easy to play for black. I think black's actually better already. I will show you a little of the game, which was this. And after that, sure enough, this Benko-like thing, b5. And if white takes a couple times, black's just got all these wonderful squares on the queen side. Might play queen a5 because that has a threat of knight takes e4. Could play knight takes e4 immediately, come to think of it, unless that works. The idea would be check, hitting the bishop, and if the knight comes back, check, and you take this bishop. I'm just making this up. I could be wrong, but I think this is right. It's a standard sort of tactic, and this is structurally wonderful for black. Okay, just to give you an idea. And that's what would have happened, but Karyakin didn't play that way. Karyakin played, so what did I say here first? Knight e3, b5, knight e3. Instead, just moved his knight up, and that makes this this makes this square potentially available to a knight. So therefore, Svidler stopped that, drove this knight back, and then broke in the center, which was at least equal. I don't think quite as good as the E5 move that we just saw. Anyway, that's maybe a quick answer to the question about what to do about knight GE2 on the fifth move, which was back that position. Those are some ideas anyway. So let's see what we've got here. Wait, are the Internet Chess Club and Lion 1962 not one and the same? Pretty much. He says no, but oh, I thought they were actually. Similar anyway. Let me just see here. What does L stand for? Oh, I'm not even saying. Not Larry. You'll have to look it up. Aren't a lot of people embarrassed by their middle names? Ah, someone already said it. It's Leonard with an O. He spelled it wrong, but Leonard. Very old-fashioned name. My grandfather's name. What else do we have here? I sent you an ICC message today. Might have been too late. Actually, I recognize that name, so I do have that question. That wasn't the one about rapid chess? You see, I have just so many of these questions that I may not get to everything. Yeah, maybe Chicherinev should repeat his question. What openings to recommend for the absolute beginner? That's in volume 4 of my Mastering the Chess Openings book, and we will talk about that. We'll probably talk about that several times, simply because I think I answered that already, as a matter of fact. But I'll answer it again later, but I wanted to get to some other questions because people are asking. Here's an interesting question. John Hartman asks, what's your favorite book on rook endings? Favorite is not necessarily best, of course. So just from a nostalgic point of view, I would say Smyslov and Levinfish's Rook Endings. Very old book, but just wonderful. It's just sort of the king of all rook ending books, referred to by everybody. Out of date because it's not computer checked, although I don't know how many mistakes they made, very few. It's what I learned with. There's also a volume by Sharon, which is rather obscure, sort of a collector's item, which I just adored. It was more detailed than Smyslov and Levinfish. But to get serious, for the practical and modern player and computer-checked books, we have several. I would recommend John M's The Survival Guide to Rook Endings, it's called, which covers everything very clearly, but not too much. So you don't get all these obscure things. You really learn things you really need to learn, plus a little more, plus some other interesting things. Yuri Averbach's volume on rook endings is another classic, actually, that's very good. And I also wanted to mention as a general endgame reference that Fundamental Chess Openings by Mueller and Lamprecht has not really been dated at all. To me, it's the best encyclopedia. It's not too long. It's got all the basics. It's got enough detail that you can look up your game afterwards, because usually you don't get a standard ending, an exactly standard ending. You get something a little different. And you can look up some things that are a little more complex and that will reduce to more basic positions. So those are some ending books. There's so many more. In fact, there's almost too many ending books. I remember in one of my reviews, I just talked about recent endgame books. This is some years ago, and there were 18 of them. There's endgame books all over. It's one of people's favorite things to write about because you can write about it quickly because all the endings are well known. And it's pretty easy to talk about logic in the ending. And it's just an easy book to write, basically, endings books. And there's almost as many as everything else except opening books, I think. Okay, so I got a little plug here with my Mastering the Chess Openings. What do you think about the relative merits, demerits of opening repertoire books? You must have sent this message pretty late. Static versus software such as chess-based, dynamic and constantly updated to learn a new opening variation. Well, repertoire books, of course, what's happened is the top player has maybe even over a year or more, plus his playing experience, picked out the lines that he thinks are good for the repertoire. And that is a huge and complicated task because, for one thing, even if you look up what the top players are playing, sometimes that's for funny reasons. It's not that they aren't good. It's just lines that they feel give them a game and maybe will be a little irregular and maybe fool people. And then the next month they're playing something else. So a repertoire book will usually give you something very solid in a lot of detail that where the tactical details are sort of worked out and give you all the ideas, talk about all the ideas, which chess-based, of course, won't. I think repertoire books are still extremely useful for the average player. And, of course, they're readable and fun if you've got any, if the writer's good and collaborates. And even repertoire books like the quality chess books, which are not very readable, very complicated and very messy, are readable if you're a fanatic chess player because they're wonderful. They give all kinds of wonderful ideas, and they give the detail that you would need if you were a grandmaster. Well, that's kind of silly, but on the other hand, it's very deep. And if you want to learn how to be a better player, you're going to want at least some of that detail. I wouldn't read a grandmaster repertoire book straight through, but they're top quality, great books by specialists in these openings. And so those are good too. I think for the kind of player listening to probably on this show, mostly, you probably want something more like an everyman repertoire book or a Gambit repertoire book. Like I just wrote one, and Graham Burgess just wrote one for D4, for playing 1D4 as white. And there are other publishers, and then move on later on to complicated things like Grandmaster repertoire books. Schiller is in poor health, and that's Eric Schiller. He's in bad health. He helped write a book with me called Taming the Wild Chess Openings that just came out this year with New in Chess, and is just an incredible person, a really hard worker. He's had all kinds of problems. He always stays cheerful. An amazing person, and I'd like to shout out to Eric. I don't think he's listening. I should tell him to watch this show. Okay, Levin Fish is on this old moldy Russian paper. No, you can buy fairly well more new copies. Sharon in German. That's Averbach in Russian. Yes, you can do this. So we have a that's Leon. So we have this multilingual fellow. What do we have? Relative demerits. Oh, yes. Well, I don't know if I finished that question, but I think they're very different things. Chess-based to put together a repertoire, you have to merge a lot of games together, which is a lot of fun, actually. Find a lot of games. You can use top-rated games, or you can hunt around and find some lower ones that interest you. You can merge them into one file, for example, for one variation. You can merge 100 games in, and then sort them out yourself. Play through them, sort them out. Normally, what I would say is you'd have an opening repertoire book, and then you'd supplement it. You'd put it may already, if it's an everyman book, it's already in chess-based format, and then just start supplementing it with your own thoughts, your own analysis. That's the main thing. If you can look at it yourself and have your own ideas, or at the very least ask, why didn't I play that move? And then when you have to answer that, you learn a lot. If you just crank through the lines, somehow for most people it just doesn't seem to work. It doesn't stick. And even if it does stick, you become sort of a mechanical player. You get confused when you're over the board, when they play one slightly different move. So you want to think about these books. I mean, that's so obvious, right? But I think people don't in practice. They don't really, they just want to learn the lines. They just memorize a lot of lines. And frankly, I just don't think it works. I think it's a real problem with students that I've had, and it's a problem with me when I want to take up a new line and I just go, oh, I'll use that book, or I'll just look at a lot of games. If I don't slow down and think about why people are playing what they're playing and what you would do if they played some other move, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have problems, at least against good players. Okay. Yeah, and let's see about the time here. I think we're over, actually, folks. Even in spite of the power failure. Maybe I should add a few minutes on because of the power failure. But this may be a good time to stop, actually. I don't see any more questions on the chat. Is that right? No, unless I missed one. So this has been fun and great questions. I'm getting good questions. Try to use the Twitter channel, the hashtag AskIamWatson. Very few people are using that. Try to use my message. You can message my handle on it. If you're an ICC member, this is a case where you have to be an ICC member, you can message space John L. Watson, that's for Leonard, and then space, and then put in the text of your question. And that's on ICC. So I'll be looking at all of those. And otherwise, we may have a specialized email coming up for that purpose. And I think that's about it, folks. I think we got through a lot of material, and I'm sorry about the power failure, but I guess these things happen. If they happen in the future, I'll be amazed, because that one, I've had this computer for 6 months or so, and it's never done that. And I didn't touch any cords, so I have no idea. I'll look into that. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next week.